Hello, I'm Sketches.n.Scrubs. I make weekly art tutorials, paint-alongs and vlogs. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. This week I'm going to be going over how I add ink to my watercolour paintings again. I did a similar video previously, but it's always good to have a look at different florals and how you can ink in different ways. So I'm just adding the finishing touches to my watercolour painting. I'll link everything that I use in this video in the description down below. And I also created a video called 50 gift ideas for artists that kind of goes through some of the supplies I use and why in more detail, so check that out as well. I typically use either Micron, Unipin or Faber-Castell fineliners to ink my watercolor painting, just because they're waterproof, but biro pens are also waterproof and work quite well. And I've also tried using brush pens in the past, which gave a completely different effect. It looked a bit more cartoony but really nice. So essentially just experiment, use whatever you have at home and see whether that gives you an effect that you like. But once you're happy with the final touches on your painting, it is time to ink. So typically I use a thicker pen to do the outer lines and thinner pens to do the details on the inside and to do the shading. Occasionally I'll just use the same size pen to do everything, so it really does depend on what I'm feeling. For this piece I used the 0.3 to do the details on the inside and the shading on the inside, and then the 0.5 to do the details on the outside after. The key thing with inking is to essentially just go around the rough brush strokes that you created for the most part. If there are certain areas that you want to draw more attention to or that you think you can define better, then this is also an excellent way to do that. So in this flower, for example, I wanted more detail in the middle, so I kind of put extra detail on the stamens. I don't know if you can see like the corner of the floral as well. I wanted to kind of put in a little fold, and I can do that with the ink. So even though the painting itself is loose, the ink kind of brings a bit more structure to it that would have otherwise been lost. As I mentioned in my other video as well, people shade in different ways, and even me, I shade in different ways depending on the piece that I'm doing. So I tend to find that I don't like adding much shading to the roses, but I do like adding shading to the 5 or 4 petal florals or the peonies as well. I just find that with the roses the petals aren't large enough. I don't know if that makes sense, to kind of add enough shading and not overwhelm the painting. That being said, my shading is very stylized and not realistic at all, but that's how I like it. So I tend to do 2 or 3 lines starting from the bottom, and then 2 or 3 lines starting from the top, and then dots to connect the two. So it's more of a pattern rather than anything too accurate. And where the lines go is often determined by where I think the shadow is coming from, but also depending on the watercolor paint underneath. So if it's darker already, I know that there's going to be a shadow there. So it's not an exact science, but it works quite nicely. For the leaves and the foliage that's around the florals, I just ink around the leaves themselves, add a little bit of detail to the foliage, but that's pretty much it. I don't add shading to the leaves, in part because I don't like shading leaves, and in part because I don't want that to be the focus of the piece, so I don't want to detract from the florals. So I just add ink to make the whole piece cohesive, but I don't add any shading. The eagle-eyed individuals watching this video may have noticed that I have switched pens. So I went from using a Unipin to a Micron, and the reason that I did that is just because I wanted a thicker pen to do the outline of the leaves and some of the florals. For me, there is genuinely nothing that determines whether I'm going for a Micron or a Unipin, apart from which one is closest to me. I just base it more on the size that I want rather than the brand that I want. I do find that I, to be honest, don't see a massive difference between the Unipin and the Microns, except for the fact that the Unipins last slightly longer and are cheaper. If you have used both, or you've used a different brand and you feel that there's like a significant difference, I would really appreciate it if you could let me know down in the comments, just because I like to experiment with them and learn more, always open to learning. Once you've done the inking, that is it, and this is the final piece. Let me know if you'd like to see the actual watercolor painting bit, or if you're happy with just the inking. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and come back next week for the next one. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss it.